Hi everyone, welcome to Bonnie Carolee Makes Cards. So this is what you get when all you feel like doing is coloring. I pulled out some of my background stamps by Simon Says Stamp, Outline Merry Christmas, a new one, Outline Ornaments, and an oldie but goodie, Poinsettia background. I wanted some easy, relaxing coloring, and so I pulled out my Arteza watercolor markers. I began by stamping all of my backgrounds on Bristol Smooth cardstock with Versamark ink. The insert has been removed from my MISTI, and I like to use something like a microfiber cloth to help me rub to get even pressure right across the panel. The cardstock is slightly oversized. Because the stamp does not go edge to edge, I typically will use a glue dot for these big red rubber stamps to hold my panel in place away from the sides of my MISTI. The glue dot does a good job of holding that panel in place while I do the stamping. To simplify the process, all of the panels were embossed with Ink on 3's Gold Rush. I began with the poinsettia background. When I looked at these flowers, I could see 3 different layers of petals. I chose 3 different colors for each of the layers: mulberry red, currant red, and bubblegum pink. Currant red, the darkest of the 3 tones, was applied to the top layer. Color was applied to the base of the petals, and then I used a watercolor brush, I think it was a number 6, dampened slightly to help pull that color out. This created a little bit of a gradient. What I love about coloring background stamps is you really don't get the full impact until they are completely done. It's a little bit like opening a Christmas gift. You have an idea of what it might be, but you don't know until it's fully open. In this case, until it's fully done. Now I'm moving on to my second color, which is mulberry red. This color favors the purple tones and I think is a nice complement to the red. I apply the color to several petals at a time and then go in with my dampened paintbrush and pull that color out. The final color that I'm introducing is on my bottom layer and it is called Bubblegum Pink. This pink is very soft and pretty. Like all the colors, when you first apply it, it is intense looking. But once you pull it out with a water brush, it just softens up and becomes nice and translucent. There are a few bonuses to painting on an embossed image. The area that you're painting is contained and you don't have to worry about paint bleeding out. I love that there's no waiting time for things to dry and I can go ahead and paint petals next to each other. And I just love the sparkly goodness that embossing adds, particularly for a Christmas card. The colors that I chose for the poinsettia are pretty soft and I love drama. So I have gone ahead and painted the background black. The background is painted very simply. I'm not using my water brush to pull that color out. I want the black to be very saturated. There's not a lot of background in this stamp, but there's enough to make those poinsettias pop off that page. This was an evening project for me, just me in my craft room. I did the coloring for all 3 panels at once. The transformation from card panels to cards took place the next day. When I began working on the outline ornament panel, I had selected a completely different color palette. I had chosen some gray tones that I would use as neutrals, but when I applied the first gray, I could see all of those lilac undertones, and that changed everything that I was going to do. Sometimes the process can take you down a completely different path than you intended. So I ended up with blues and purples and grays. The 3 grays that I chose are smoky gray, elephant gray, and dolphin gray. The ornaments were colored with 2 shades of purple, periwinkle and amethyst purple, and also 2 blues, cardium blue and denim blue. With the exception of a handful of the deep blue ornaments, the purples and blues were used mainly as accents. I liked how the soft silvery gray tones contrasted with the gold embossing. Sometimes I can get really hung up on what colors to use for each element, in this case ornaments. I really like compositions like this where there is a repeated design. I only have to make the decision once about what colors I'm going to use for each style of ornament, and then the others are painted exactly the same way. This not only keeps my painting experience relaxing, but it also helps to make sure that the overall design has a cohesive feel to it. This stamp has very little background, and like the other one, I went in with my black Arteza pen and just colored those bits in. For my last panel, I took a completely different approach. This fun stamp is simply a Merry Christmas sentiment repeated. The words overlap one another and they are in different orientations. So I found it easiest to first go in and paint all of the background. Like the other 2 panels, I used my black Arteza marker. As I progressed, it became much easier for me to see these words, which were made up of a series of upper and lowercase letters. Such a fun design, and I wanted to continue with that feeling in the colors that I chose. I began by painting all of the words that said Christmas. I alternated between currant red and light magenta. As I painted each letter, I painted it in its entirety, even where it overlapped another letter. When I introduced the second color on the alternating letters, I did the same thing, creating a blend between the magenta and the red where they overlapped. I like to keep things as uncomplicated as I can. The exact same color pattern was followed for both the words Merry and Christmas. So for example, all of the C's in Christmas were colored magenta. If the red and magenta weren't bright enough for you, hold on to your socks because here comes acid green. For the second word, Merry, I just went in and did all my green coloring at once. This panel was finished up with cyanine blue. I think I've got both the cheery and bright covered in this card. All of the panels were cut down with the largest die in Simon Says Stamps stitched rectangles. I wanted all of the sentiments for these cards to be recessed, so I chose die sets that had shadow dies. The shadow die is used to first cut the opening in the panel. The panel will be mounted on foam, so I use a little bit of post-it note tape just to hold them together and get the die positioned using the opening of the panel onto the foam. The panel is then adhered to the foam backing, making sure that the die cut openings are aligned. The foam back panel is left under the weight of my MISTI so that there's good contact between the paper and the foam. The shadow die cut from the panel is retained, and the script die cut out of matte gold is mounted on top of it. The foam stretched a little bit when it was die cut with the shadow die, and so after it has been left for a few minutes for the glue to set up, I trim off the excess foam. The panel is then mounted onto black cardstock that is slightly smaller than A2 size, and then onto the card base that measures 5.5 inches by 4.25 inches. The peace sentiment is recessed into the panel. A secondary sentiment was chosen from Winter Birds and embossed in gold on black cardstock. Both the sentiments and black foam were die cut using Simon Says Stamps sentiment labels. They were stacked and mounted on the cards. The outline ornament card was finished up with Nouveau Crystal glaze on some of the details of the ornaments. The glaze adds some pretty shine to the card. I made a last-minute change to the outline Merry Christmas card. I wasn't loving the gold inlay in Joy, so I changed it up for hot pink. To finish up the poinsettia background card, the centers of the poinsettias were finished off with gold micro beads. After a good amount of glue was applied to the center of the flowers, the micro beads were poured over top of them. I let the glue set up for just a couple of minutes, and then I put another dollop of glue not covering the entire center over top and added more of the beads. The result is a flower center that is dimensional and slightly domed. These teeny tiny beads add a nice fine texture. And that wraps up these cards featuring Simon Says Stamps background stamps, poinsettia background, outline Merry Christmas, and outline ornaments. The repeat design makes them easy to color, and couple that with a medium like Arteza watercolor markers and you have a relaxing evening. If you are interested in any of the products that I have used in this video, they'll be linked in the description and on my blog. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I appreciate your visit.